Busch Gardens, now known for its world-class roller coasters and immersive animal encounters, had humble beginnings. Originally, it wasn't a theme park at all. It was a simple brewery and hospitality center founded by Anheuser-Busch in 1959. Visitors came to sample beer and enjoy bite-to-eat and take in the beautifully landscaped grounds. But as its popularity grew, so did the ambition behind it. By the late 1960s, Busch Gardens had transformed from a brewery into a full-fledged attraction. One of the first major expansions, the introduction of the Monorail. In 1966, Busch Gardens unveiled the Serengeti Flyer Monorail, an innovative attraction that gave visitors a one-of-a-kind perspective of the park's African wildlife. Unlike a traditional monorail, this was known as Intamin's suspended monorail system. The monorail's elevated tracks stretch over the Serengeti Plain, offering guests a bird's-eye view of the animals roaming freely in the expansive habitats. The ride's slow speed allowed for stunning views of giraffes, zebras, rhinoceroses, and antelopes, creating the feeling of a true African safari. Originally, the monorail cars seen in this footage were equipped with some kind of primitive AC system, and apparently it worked for the most part, but towards the end of these cars' lifespan, they struggled to keep up with the rapidly changing Florida weather. So, Busch Gardens refurbished the monorail, and apparently made it an upcharge for a short period of time, but part of the reason it was an upcharge was because they had gotten new sleeker trains with a more modern AC system. Despite all these upgrades, the monorail failed to be as popular as attractions they were adding at the time, like Kumba, Montu, and several other smaller attractions. So Busch Gardens opted to close the monorail in 1999, leaving the station empty and unused for most of the year. While waiting for the Skyride, you would just be able to see the area and space the monorail once occupied. Although Busch Gardens interestingly removed the track pretty quickly, something they probably wouldn't do today. Just as a side note, the maintenance bay was reused for Howler Scream Houses a few times, most notably Nightshade Toy Factory. Busch Gardens quickly began looking at options to replace the monorail's large footprint, and they would find inspiration from a theme park that opened just down the road a year prior to the monorail's demise.
First came the Magic Kingdom, then Epcot, then Disney MGM Studios, and now... Introducing the most adventurous Walt Disney World theme park ever. Disney's Animal Kingdom, the imagination of Disney. Gone wild.
Now, I'm going out on a limb for this next part, but Kilimanjaro Safaris was an opening day attraction for Animal Kingdom and still exists to this day, although wildly different from the version that it debuted with. It had more special effects, a hot spring segment, a poacher animatronic, a bunch of crazy stuff. There's videos on it, but Busch Gardens apparently read this and...
A runabout. I'll steal it! No one will ever know!
And with no inspiration or copying homework at all, a few years later in 2000, Busch Gardens would announce they would be receiving their own wild safari attraction, Rhino Rally.
Well, that's why we're here today, because a year from about right now, they're going to open up Rhino Rally, which is like nothing I've ever seen before. What you're going to be able to do is get in a Land Rover, just like I take to Africa when I do my shows or by myself on safari. You're going to be in a Land Rover, and you're actually going in with the animals, actually in with the elephants, not a barrier. The elephants can come right up to your vehicle. The rhinos can come right up to your vehicle. The Cape buffalo can do the same thing. Then you're going to end up on a stream where there's a flash flood on a bridge. It washes away the bridge going down this cavern, like this canyon, and then there's crocodiles and alligators in there, and then ends up in a waterfall. I mean, it's like no other park in the world has ever tried anything like this. No danger. They've all been worked, all the animals here at Busch Gardens have all been here for years, and the staff has been here for years. So Busch Gardens has always been an innovator of animal habitats. Back in the 1960s, they were some of the first people to ever introduce different species of hoofstock and animals. So they know what they're doing here, and I must take my hats off to them, because this is going to be something where you not only have a fun ride or a fun day, but also educational, where a young person or an adult, it's for both, can actually see a rhino up close and see why it's almost extinct.
Rhino Rally would actually occupy only a small bit of the space the monorail formula occupied, and it would be perfectly fit in the pre-existing train track loop for the Serengeti Express. Busch Gardens transformed this area into winding, bouncy roadways, as well as a flash flood section. Located just a little ways past the Nairobi train station, Rhino Rally would occupy some unused space from the monorail. While Rhino Rally didn't technically replace the monorail fully, it did, as I previously mentioned, use some land that the monorail circled around. As guests made their way towards Rhino Rally, depending on what direction they're heading from, they would come across the brand new elephant habitat. Now, the park always had elephants out on the Serengeti, but they were never really on display in a habitat before this time. And on the opposite side of the pathway was a brand new rhino habitat as well, to coincide with the whole new themed area that Rhino Rally was opening with. Now, the transition from these relatively themed habitats to the very light theming of Rhino Rally was supposed to feel cheap, was supposed to feel temporary, was supposed to feel like that this was just tossed up in the middle of the Serengeti. And I think it works for the most part. The company logos they sprinkled around and like the very cheap banners and just the very unthemed pathway leading to the attraction, I think, worked in the ride's favor. And this is a very rare case where doing cheap and lackluster theming works in your ride's storytelling favor. And I want to point something out here that I've noticed. Like Gwazi and Tidal Wave, Rhino Rally had a themed snack stand in its ride area, and I'm wondering if this was like just a thing they liked doing at the time, because this is multiple attractions that have themed snack stands. I thought it was just a bizarre thing that these attractions seem to have sprinkled in. And I mean, it's themed, it's here. You can get a drink before you go on your safari ride. Anyway, the queue, of course, was also very cheap and lackluster for the most part. It was just a white tent and switchbacks. If this was built today, people would complain about it. But for the time, it worked for what the attraction was trying to be. It was themed enough, and honestly, the line was so short most of the time, you weren't in the queue long enough to even, notice this theming. Anyway, so it's the effort that counts. Once you were directed to your row and you boarded your Land Rover, it was off on your adventure. If you were lucky enough or unlucky enough to be picked as co-pilot, you would get picked on the entire ride, which I guess makes this ride different enough from Kilimanjaro safaris. But once your adventure is started, you cross a small wooden bridge over the elephant habitat, and this gets you even closer to these massive animals, which I think is one of the cooler aspects of this ride. Also, this ride rapidly changed elevation a few times, and one of these times was crossing under the access area into the elephant habitat, which was creatively disguised as a tunnel, which I think is a neat choice. But once you were through that cave, this ride basically became knockoff Kilimanjaro safaris. It was just a winding road through a big open space in the park with hopefully animals. They could wander pretty far from the ride track, and there was a few times where I barely saw any animals at all. And I know that's a risk you take with these rides, but the coolest part of this ride was getting to see the titular rhino of the rhino that's rallying or something. I don't understand what this ride story is supposed to be. It doesn't really have one. You would pass the alligator habitat, which I never saw an alligator in there anyway, and now you get to the infamous part of the ride that it would either break down or you would just veer to the right here and go back to unload. But if you were lucky enough and the weather was just right, the moon was aligned, the planets were aligned, you got to experience what this ride was built off of, the breakaway bridge portion. Once again, the driver would put the pressure on the co-pilot, asking if they should risk it and drive across the bridge. Of course, there was no other way out, so you would have to drive across the bridge to complete the route. The driver would then drive across the bridge, and the Land Rover would get stuck as a flash flood occurred, causing the vehicle to rock side to side and the bridge to eventually break away, drifting down the raging river. After sliding away from the bridge, the Land Rover began to rock side to side and rotate in various points in the ride layout, hoping to convince guests that they were really being washed away down a raging river. While the water's movement wasn't like Congo River Rapids, it was still a pretty convincing effect, and had some near-miss moments like the Land Rover sliding between a canyon and narrowly missing a suspiciously rhinoceros-shaped waterfall. After narrowly escaping that waterfall, the Land Rover slowly drifts towards a washed-away bridge, and the driver sees this as our opportunity to finally escape this raging river. We slam into the washed-away bridge, and the driver takes the opportunity to drive up out of the river onto a very convenient roadway that happens to be there, passing by Rescue 1, which was the one that was, I guess, guiding us to a safe point or something. Like I said, this ride doesn't really have a story. We cross over the river section and head back to the load, or, well, unload, which is separate from the load, which is just around the corner. And if you were lucky enough, maybe your driver would congratulate your co-pilot for being a good co-pilot or blaming them for the river portion entirely. But how did the river portion work?
Okay, so there's a couple different things. Vekoma builds roller coasters, so they use roller coaster technology with it. And the track itself that the bridge portion went on was actually gently sloped downhill, and you would start off where you were at, and you would go around this big loop, and then it would stop at the part where you were able to pull out, and it was actually almost opposite of where you were. And it had a little bit of a hill there for you to climb up out of it. So you climb up out of that, you would actually go over a bridge that crossed over where you had been before, and then go down into the station again. So it kind of did a little crossover figure eight. And then the pontoon, after you pulled off and you left, the pontoon would actually go down, flip up into this locked position, and then it would rotate into the bridge. And it would just keep doing the circuit.
Like most new theme park attractions that have groundbreaking technology, Rhino Rally would be faced with lengthy downtime and technical issues, mostly affecting the water portion. Shortly after opening, though, Rhino Rally had its first accident, and its only accident. And this was the situation where the driver miscalculated a turn, and the Land Rover flipped on its side. After this incident, the ride path was drastically modified, making it less bumpy, curvy, and overall wider for the Land Rovers. Now, this isn't the only change Rhino Rally went under. Shortly after this incident, when the Land Rovers were modified, a lot of the logos from companies were removed. And I'm not sure if this is associated or just a coincidence that they are at the same time, and SirWillow doesn't know much information either.
So the company logos on the Land Rovers, they're an interesting story, and I don't know the whole thing because I came in really... When I got there, it was at a period where the logos, for the most part, had been removed from the trucks. So I didn't know as much about them. As I understand it, many of the logos were actually genuine sponsorships, or they were taken from logos of companies in Africa that would sponsor rallies and then modified and genericized a little bit. So I believe that there was actually some legitimate sponsors, but others that were created in such a way to look like real sponsors that you would see in African Road Rally. So kind of a mixture of real and not real. And then, like I said, when I came in, by that point, the sponsorship money for the attraction had ended. They were still running, but there wasn't a sponsor at that point. So most of those logos then got scrubbed and cleaned off and removed. And we just had pretty much blank Land Rovers with numbers on them.
Unfortunately, time was not kind to Rhino Rally's water portion, and soon park expansion came to claim its name. It was rumored in 2011 that the park would be getting a new coaster, some kind of intimate launch coaster like Maverick at Cedar Point, and soon it was announced Cheetah Hunt would be coming to the park, a family multi-launch coaster, and a massive, expansive addition to the park. Not only would Cheetah Hunt reuse the monorail station that had been sitting there for nearly a decade, as mentioned before, it would sadly bring an end to Rhino Rally's water portion, at least for Rhino Rally's function. Cheetah Hunt's construction would begin by transforming the monorail station into a highly themed queue and gutting Rhino Rally's water portion and filling it in with concrete. Cheetah Hunt closely follows the layout of Rhino Rally's water portion, although backwards. To accommodate the construction of Cheetah Hunt and the eventual opening, Rhino Rally's storyline and layout was slightly modified. Now, the Serengeti portion of the ride was not changed at all, and instead, Land Rovers would prioritize the bypass that was originally used for when the water portion was down. This would become the new ending to the attraction, and while the roadways for the water portion still exist, as well as the retention pond and supporting elements for Rhino Rally, they aren't used for anything other than maintenance. and the roadway out of the water portion still does exist. I believe it's used for maintenance on Cheetah's third launch. And, of course, the Rhino rock work is still there, which is one of the more noticeable remnants while you're on Cheetah Hunt. While Cheetah Hunt's a great addition to the park, it was one of the last good additions before the park started to suffer. Rhino Rally's new storyline was lackluster at best and didn't really make sense. They just tossed an extra Land Rover with a help sign on the back of it towards the end of the ride, and often the driver barely mentioned the storyline at all throughout the experience, and more focused on the safari element of the attraction. It sucked because soon Rhino Rally's demise would come out of nowhere when the film Blackfish was released, and shortly after. As we all know, Blackfish caused the parks to suffer financially, and their income plummeted by 84%. Several rides, like Tidal Wave, Gwazi, and Jumbo Junction, closed due to this, and the park had to cut expensive attractions, and no better attraction to cut than the ride that made you train a bunch of drivers and had big expensive Land Rovers. So Rhino Rally was just abandoned and never reopened, even though rumors were stating that it might reopen at some point. Eventually, rumors started to circulate that it would eventually be replaced by something, a family wooden coaster, a motorbike coaster of some sort. There were several rumors floating around that you can find online, even some obscure ones like the Giga Coaster would go here, but Rhino Rally's replacement never came, at least for several years. It just became overgrown and an eyesore from the Skyride. But eventually in 2019, permits were filed to modify Rhino Rally's queue and place a new concrete slab where the former maintenance and loading area was for the attraction. Construction started in late 2019 and continued throughout the year, before 2020 came around and construction was temporarily paused due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The construction got to the point of just demolishing the queue, and then from that point just sat there for a little bit, but construction eventually resumed once the parks reopened and quickly progressed from there. It was eventually announced that, just like Busch Gardens Williamsburg and SeaWorld San Antonio, Busch Gardens Tampa would be receiving the world's largest S&S Scream and Swing. After a long period of employee testing and pass holder previews, Serengeti Flyer finally opened in May, and it debuted with an interesting variation on the other SeaWorld parks' S&S Scream and Swings. Now, some of you may remember the wilder or milder modes on this attraction. This was a very short-lived option during the attraction's initial opening months, and the variation was actually a little noticeable for after multiple rides. The milder version started off at a slower swinging pace and did not reach as high and did not go as fast. Meanwhile, the wilder version was the version we have today, which is the very fast, intense, high swinging version where you nearly invert. That's one of the crazy things about these flat rides is they almost get to where you're upside down. I think it's at like a little past a 90-degree angle. It might be 95 or 96 degrees of swinging. I wasn't able to find it on Google for this exact model. Google says it swings through about 90. But these flat rides are such a unique and fun addition to the park, as much as I have personal criticisms for the placement of Serengeti Flyer. But let's take a look at some remnants of Rhino Rally around the area. The entrance plaza was completely redesigned from Rhino Rally, and part of the queue was demolished. But once in the queue, especially in the quick queue line, you can spy the road leading to the bridge that crosses the elephant habitat. You can also find in various spots in the queue tire tracks going across the queue on the ground, as well as the original row markers for Rhino Rally. Just like Gwazi, you can also find spots where concrete was replaced where the air gates used to be, and as well as the control systems for Rhino Rally's loading procedures. One of the other remnants you can see is actually at the attraction's exit. You can see this road leading down from a fenced-off area. This is the exit from the water portion, and this other road is the alternate route from the post-Cheetah Hunt version of the attraction. This is one of the more noticeable remnants of Rhino Rally. Another smaller remnant is this white line running down the exit path. This is left over from the unload of Rhino Rally, since Serengeti Flyer is quite literally just connected to that old slab of concrete. On the Skyride, you can see a lot more remnants. You can see the old cave and a lot of roadways and ponds and the survey markers, or I think they're called the route markers, throughout the big overgrown open area. They really did not remove much of Rhino Rally when Serengeti Flyer was constructed because they didn't need to. In the plaza area, you can also still find tire tracks leading towards the ride's entrance. And obviously, the loading area for Serengeti Flyer is the former Rhino Rally station, and it reuses a good portion of the queue, even though the former entrance area was demolished. You can also still find Land Rovers as props scattered throughout the park. I don't know if these are tied into the Land Rover sponsorship with Rhino Rally, but I just thought it was an interesting bit of history to know. Now, if you're looking to experience something like Rhino Rally again, you'll have to travel outside the US. This most similar attraction I can find is this knockoff studio tour kind of ride at Movieland called Magma 2.0, and if you want a safari ride, you can go to Disney's Animal Kingdom, or I guess Chessington, and ride their super big truck safari ride that's called Zoofari. Rhino Rally was such a unique attraction, and it's a shame it was replaced by such a lackluster singular attraction. And as fun as Serengeti Flyer is, the other SeaWorld parks do have this ride. The one at SeaWorld San Antonio is extremely similar in height and speed, and that one goes over a body of water, which I think makes it a far better ride. This ride gives you a plain view of grass and on the other side, I guess the park and the Tampa skyline, but other than that, it just feels like a waste of space when they could have done more with the land. I think Phoenix Rising could have taken up more of Rhino Rally's former plot of land as well. It could have been more like how Big Bad Wolf's revenge is going to be at Busch Gardens Williamsburg, where it's the much longer layout. And then that park could have gotten their major thrill coaster to replace Drachenfire like they should have. Phoenix Rising is already a short, lackluster family coaster, and making it have 2 lift hills and extend out into the Serengeti might have been a better idea, or pushing Serengeti Flyer further back and putting Phoenix Rising back there and making it a completely different themed attraction. There's plenty of room for them to do this, and it could have been another mini-themed land, and added more attractions to an area that doesn't have that many, because it's just the train station and Serengeti Flyer. They could have built a family wooden coaster, something the park desperately needs since Gwazi got removed. I know at one point they were planning to put one in Jungala, and that eventually became Texas Stingray. That's my conspiracy theory, because I was told by several sources that Busch Gardens was planning a family GCR wooden coaster, but this is a story for another day. Overall, Rhino Rally is one of the most unique attractions ever built, and I'm so thankful that it existed, and I'm so thankful for SirWillow helping out. Here's a little bonus interview to close off the documentary.
The whole breakaway bridge and the water element, it was built by a company named Vekoma. And really it was built with stuff that was meant to operate on land, and then it was put underwater. So yeah, there were always incidents with them. When you came to the spot where you got ready to go on the bridge, you would stop, and in the script you would look at your co-driver, who you had been picking on the whole time, and you ask him, okay, we got a fork in the road. Which way do we go? Right or left? And you kind of pin the decision on them. Now, there was actually a little signal light in the bushes there that let you know if the bridge was working or not. So if you saw a red light, you know the bridge isn't working. If you saw a green light, it is. But it's hidden in such a way so we as the drivers knew it, but the passengers wouldn't see it. And then regardless of what the passenger answered, you would go depending upon what that light said. So if the driver or the passenger said, yo, hey, let's go right, and the bridge is working, I'm like, you know what? You've messed up this whole trip so far. I'm not trusting you. I'm going left. Or if the bridge wasn't working, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Let's go right. Right turned you right back into the station again. That was the end of the ride. All done. Left would then take you to the bridge. So you had that alternate. I don't know of anybody who actually got stuck on the bridge itself. So that would have been rare. Although I'm sure it probably happened. But it was notorious for breaking down with the trucks out in the water. So the Land Rovers, the bridge would actually lock the Land Rover onto the pontoon part. And then it actually had a guiding track that would go down through the water. And this, that would help make sure that you went where you were supposed to go and keep you on pace. The Land Rovers all had a big red button in it. The old deal, don't push the big red button. Well, that big red button would stop the whole bridge part of it, turn the water off, drain the water, and it would drain it in like 15 seconds. It just whoosh down. Because if you had somebody go out of your Land Rover, you didn't want them getting stuck in the water, getting stuck in the machinery, drowning, or anything like that. So it shut everything down in a hurry. I only had one time I hit that button. And that's because I had a passenger in my Land Rover stand up and change seats in the middle of the water because they didn't want to get wet. And I hit that button at that point. Now, there were a couple different things that could happen if you pushed it. Basically, everything drained, shut down, and then we would have to come out and evacuate the Land Rovers. That did happen sometimes. I only had to help with one evacuation, thankfully. Or the other thing that could happen, if it wasn't too serious and the mechanics happened to be there, they could reset it, refill it with water, and you could essentially continue on the way you were before. And that's what happened the one time I hit the button. Was the person sat down, they realized how serious it was after I got onto them, and we were able to reset and keep going. So that's basically what you had. And yeah, the evacs were fun. We practiced those too. That was a whole nother separate training deal. Oh boy. I mean, there are some memorable ones. So there was one time I was out, we've been watching the weather. Florida's lightning capital of the world. Thunderstorms all the time. Rhino Rally sat in a portion that there was a little bit of the Serengeti Safari area next to us. And then you had the street, and the water park was right across the way. And if you were at the right angle, you could actually look over and you could see one of the towers where the water slides. So I was out there one time driving, had just come into the Rhino area, and you could see the clouds coming together. And all of a sudden, you hear this crack, boom! This lightning bolt hit the water tower at the water park. And I mean, scared the stuffing out of me. And then you realize the Rhino actually jumped, probably a foot in the air, and then starts spinning in circles. Now, the rhinos in there were generally docile. They were calm and tame, and I'm like, this dude is spinning. This is not a good thing. You couldn't back the Land Rovers up, which meant I had to go around past spinning Rhino and then get out of there. And the top speed on the Land Rovers was 7 miles an hour. They had speed limiters on them. And so I'm sitting there going, come on, get out. I don't want poor mad Rhino. Rhino left us alone, didn't do anything, but I didn't know they could jump in the air. And yeah, spinning was crazy. Okay. The other thing I learned too is scimitar horned oryx at the time were a highly endangered species. Busch Gardens actually helped bring them back from near extinction. But they had a big group of them out for Rhino Rally. And we were driving around one time, and, I'm talking about them while watching the road, and I hear this kid behind me going, "Ew, Mom, why is that one drinking the other's pee?" Nature happens. I got to find out and learn that day that the way the males determine if the females are in heat is by taking a sample. Try explaining that one to Junior out there. So we had that. I had the elephant one time throw hay at me. I never did understand that one. They would throw hay and straw on their back to help provide sunscreen, essentially. And I guess it just didn't like us going by this one time, and it threw a stack at us. Didn't get to us. It kind of dispersed in the air. But so yeah, you would see some entertaining, amusing things from the animals sometimes. Oh, I had some good ones. Very possibly. Okay, so two of them on the horrible, terrible side. I mentioned the one with them getting up, but there's another terrible and then another really good one. On the terrible side, I had one moment where I was going up, approaching the elephant area. You cross over a bridge, and then there's a sharp turn you have to make. But you have to time your turn and watch because there's a couple fake concrete termite mounds there. Well, I mistimed it one time, and I scraped one of the mounds. Well, the way these Land Rovers are built, you can't see out of the Land Rover. I have no idea how damaged it is. I don't know if I've torn stuff off. And we're not allowed to step out of the Land Rover in the animal areas for multiple reasons. Safety, health, all sorts of stuff. So all I could do was I had to pull over and radioed in on our CB radios that we had there and said, hey, I just hit the rock. I don't know if I'm damaged or not. Can somebody come check and take a look and see if I can keep driving? And it took, it felt like an hour. It was probably 5 minutes. But it felt like forever because I'm trying to explain to all the passengers in the Land Rover why I'm stopped and that I'm a dummy and that I couldn't drive, but you're going to have to drive further with me. And I'm going to try to make this entertaining, but at the same time, I don't know if I've wrecked us or not. Thankfully, all I did was scrape it. And so I finally got it all clear. You're good. Keep driving so we can get the ride going again. And then I had to drive the whole rest of the way with this group that was basically just giving me deadly looks of silence. Jokes? No, jokes weren't working at that point. Apologies? Nah, they didn't want apologies. They just wanted off that Land Rover and away from that idiot driver who couldn't drive. And that was awkward. Hated that trip. On the other hand, one of my favorite memories, my wife was a teacher at the time. I loved when I would occasionally get students from our school on the Land Rover. And my very last time driving, I knew I was quitting. We actually had told people this is his last trip. Grateful. My manager was loading up the Land Rover and said, hey, folks, he's heading out. He's moving. You've got his farewell voyage. And it turned out on that Land Rover were a couple friends of mine and actually one of my students from the school and her parents. And so not only did I have a few regular guests, but I had people I knew, which meant, okay, I can totally unload. And the student was a good one. She was a great student, but she was also one of those very easy to tease. And I kind of looked over at her parents and I got a wink from Dad. I'm like, awesome, here we go. And I picked on her the whole way. She wasn't even my co-driver. I picked on them a little bit too. But, I mean, it was just silly stuff. One of my old jokes was with the flamingos was, you know how a flamingo gets its color? Because of what it eats. It's the shrimp, but that gives it its color. So what would a pack of flamingos look like if they ate a pack of Skittles? Taste the rainbow. And then I look at the girl, I don't know, how many Skittles have you been eating? You're looking kind of green. And I remember her in the middle of this at one point going, Mr. Burnett! It was a lot of fun. That was one of my most memorable trips. And I loved when I would occasionally get people I knew because, yeah, you could really have some fun at their expense. So, I had a great time with Rhino Rally. Like I said, it was one of those that I got to crack jokes and see animals and hopefully not wreck Land Rovers. It was a great 2 years and a fun way to get introduced to working at the amusement theme parks. So thank you so much for allowing me on. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. I hope I answered your questions and brought some fun to it. Would love to be back on again. So thank you so very much.